are here and those of you that are currently live on Facebook. So we know a lot of you are watching on Facebook. I'm going to be your host again today. And for those of you I have not met yet, I'm Casey Fisher, and I get to host this today on behalf of the Koolen-de Vries Syndrome Foundation. I am mom to Hudson, a 10-year-old with KDVS. I am honored to share the screen today with Dr. Angela Morgan, a speech pathologist and speech scientist that leads the Speech and Language Group at Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and is a professor director of speech pathology at the University of Melbourne. Her current program of work is focused on understanding the genetic and brain basis of childhood speech and language disorder, in particular in children with apraxia of speech. She leads the National Health and Medical Research Council Center of Research Excellence in Speech and Language Neurobiology. In recent years, Angela has developed a passion for studying speech and language in children with rare genetic syndromes to optimize clinical outcomes and to improve prognostic counseling for families of affected children. So welcome back. Well, first say hello to you, and then I'll introduce Olivia, but thank you again so much for joining us today. You were very popular last time, and everyone's really happy you're back.
Oh, thanks, Casey. It's really lovely to be back with this group. I've said to Olivia she's going to really love the session this morning because all the families just so warm and welcoming. And yes, we have some slides and things planned, but we're really happy to just go more informally and answer questions as people might have questions that arise, because that's where the most meaningful discussion happens. So people don't feel shy. Every question is really warmly welcomed, and we love that. It's much nicer than hearing our own voices all of the time. So thank you for having us.
Well, you're always so easy to talk to. I'm always excited when we get to invite you in to join us. And what's exciting is you have a partner today to join us as well. And so I want to be sure and introduce the very talented PhD student that has joined us today, and Olivia Van Reyk. And Olivia is a trained speech pathologist completing a Bachelor of Science in 2012 and a Master of Speech Pathology in 2014 at the University of Melbourne. She works as a research officer in the Speech and Language Research Group led by Professor Angela Morgan at the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and has worked mostly in a research setting for the duration of her career. She has worked across a range of projects, gaining expertise in speech and language phenotyping for gene discovery research with children and families with childhood apraxia of speech and stuttering. She is currently coordinating the Speech Tracker Study, which we will talk about today, a natural history study measuring speech outcomes in children with rare genetic conditions. So Olivia, obviously you're extremely talented, and we're so happy you're a part of this. So welcome.
Thank you, Casey. Thanks for the kind introduction. And it's really a pleasure to be here today and to meet you all for the first time. So yeah, really happy to be here.
And lastly, in terms of introductions, I just wanted to say that we're meeting today again, and thanks to the KDVS Foundation and their commitment to educate, increase awareness, and promote research for the support and enrichment of children and individuals living with KDVS and their families. So again, to the KDVS Foundation, thank you for continuing to make these types of events possible. And to those of you that are kind of new to our organization, if you want to learn more after we have this call, please don't hesitate to visit kdvsfoundation.org. So a bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to dive right in. So you don't want to just hear me ramble on. So usually we do questions. We didn't do that this time around. And so what I think was going to work so great about today is we do have these wonderful ladies that are so easy to talk to and so encouraging about you asking your questions. So we want you to go ahead and be thinking about that. As things come to mind that you want to ask them, please feel free to put that in the Q&A section. We've got Ashley who's going to help us monitor that, make sure we're keeping up with all the questions coming in. And then certainly as they share their research, if you have additional questions, just go ahead and type them in, and we will get to just as many as we possibly can. Also, just keep in mind, we also want to do our best to keep the questions to their area of expertise. So just keep that in mind as you're asking the questions, because there may be some that we need to give to some of our other wonderful specialists instead. Also, the call is being recorded, and we will share the link via email and social media afterwards. And that's really it for housekeeping. I want to give you, as I always do, just a brief history of our syndrome. Many of you know all about this and are completely the experts. But thanks to the advances in testing, we have a lot more families that are and individuals that are now becoming diagnosed and very, very new in their journey. So what I wanted to share with you is just a little bit of info. Koolen-de Vries Syndrome was first identified in 2006 and named after Dr. David Koolen and Dr. Bert de Vries. And as many of you know, we're very, very lucky because they're so involved with research and helping us learn more about this syndrome. This syndrome involves the 17th chromosome, and it's caused by a microdeletion or a mutation. The microdeletion or the cancel 1 mutation causes developmental delays, learning difficulties, and can cause other health concerns as well. And many of our family members experience challenges with speech. And so it's always such a joy to be able to talk to Angela Morgan and hear more about the work that's being done. The prevalence of the microdeletion is now estimated at 1 in 55,000 individuals. Due to a limited number of identified cancel 1 mutations, at this time, the prevalence of the mutation cannot be determined as more studies are required. And again, you can learn much, much more about KDVS as well as the research project by visiting the foundation website I referenced earlier. So speaking of research, let's not waste any more time getting to know Dr. Morgan and Olivia. So the first one, I just think will get you warmed up. So before you go straight to the science, let's have a little fun here. So first of all, can you both just tell our group listening how you were drawn to this field and what it was that made you want to go into research as well?
Oh, there are so many different things that led me to this area, but I suppose some of my early experiences were that my brother and my father and my grandfather all had some speech difficulties, so I could see there was a genetic basis there. And also I was at a high school where I did have fellow students who had communication difficulties, and I was struck even then by, I suppose I felt a lack of support that those individuals were receiving, where I could see those impacts on their lives. So yeah, I think they're the two of the core reasons, but it's fascinating when you think back, there are so many pathways that maybe lead you to work in an area. And then with Koolen-de Vries, Dr. David Koolen and Bert de Vries were put in contact with me because I'd worked with another colleague of theirs in the Netherlands. So that's, people often ask me, how did I come to the Koolen-de Vries family? And that's sort of, yeah, was the wonderful introduction to this particular group. Liv?
Yeah, so if I think about sort of my journey into speech pathology, similar to Angela, having sort of family members experiencing speech difficulties, and then going through my training during university, the more I learned about the profession, it became evident that there was quite a lot more research that needed to be done, and thinking about the things that we implement in practice and what are the gaps in the knowledge base. So I've always had a really scientific sort of love of science. So I think that's where my initial training in science, and then that led me into speech pathology. So I've really worked more towards the research side of things, and being very grateful to Ange to have the opportunity to be put into different areas of work, and particularly in genetic conditions, and then more recently into Koolen-de Vries. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we're very glad that it led you both to us. Another thing, you know, we love to ask, and Dr. Morgan, you probably remember me asking you last time, but can you tell us just a couple of fun facts about yourselves? I think the families like to really get to know you personally. So just anything that's not related to science.
Yes, yeah. Oh dear, I'm so boring, you know. I have 2 children, 2 boys that keep me on my toes, as Olivia hears about often. So 2 boys in primary school, and I like sport a lot. So I do a lot of exercise that keeps me sane because I'm a very restless person. And I love homewares, and I spend hours looking at homewares magazines and things like that. How boring am I, really? And I'm from a small island, Tasmania, on the bottom of Australia, which is known for having that terrible Tassie devil in all of the Looney Tunes cartoons. So there you go. My US colleagues always like to think that, and some call me the Tassie devil at times. So there you go. Liv's more interesting. Liv's more interesting.
That's fun. That's a really fun fact.
We're both from small areas, and so I like that. I think that's what's drawn us together.
I think so too. Regional girls.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I grew up in a regional part of Victoria, so about 3 hours east of Melbourne, and then moved to Melbourne for university, and I've been here for over 10 years now, so I love it here. I've got 2 little nieces who I just adore, so 4 and 8 months old, so they keep me connected with kids and how they're developing and things, so I really love that. Outside of work, I like to dance. So I've done a lot of dancing over my life, early in childhood, and now just a bit more as a hobby, nothing too serious. Love to travel. So it's been hard the last 2 years being locked in Melbourne, but taking opportunities to get out and about a bit more now that we can. Yeah, love food, coffee. Melbourne's the coffee capital, we know. So that's it really.
That's wonderful. No, thank you both for sharing that. And then one more question I wanted to ask you both, and then we'll get more into the details of your research. But what do you see are kind of some of the most interesting things about studying Koolen-de Vries syndrome that you've encountered kind of during your time? What stands out to you?
Yes, I think what stands out to me is the ability for children to continue learning and to continue to improve their skills and abilities. So I do feel with Koolen-de Vries syndrome, this is something that's even more aware to me than with some other conditions that I work with. So that's, I suppose, part of the work that Olivia will talk about today with the speech tracker, wanting to understand that a little bit more so that we can get the evidence to show that ongoing development as well, and to really be able to advocate for greater services. Another thing would be some of the children that we're aware, whilst they mightn't have yet the movement ability to get their speech going, for some of the children, they seem to have picked up literacy along the way. They might be able to sign really well. We know one of our gorgeous family members, I know the parents wouldn't mind my saying that he was, really topping a spelling bee at sort of age 9 by being able to sign before he really could verbally spell sort of so quickly and clearly. So I think there's some of the things that stand out to me in some of the areas where I'd really love us to understand more and be able to harness those strengths and work out how to tailor our therapies better to those underlying patterns. Yeah. It's probably a bit unfair for Liv because she's just started working with Koolen-de Vries.
Yeah, I was just going to pretty much echo what Ange said, and also just the really social and keen desire to communicate despite the communication challenges, I think, has been really striking for me, having worked in a few different conditions. That's really stood out about Koolen-de Vries. So yeah.
That's really neat. I was actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking, gosh, yeah, I'm asking you a hard question as you're just getting started, but you're right. That's something I feel like no matter, how kind of early in your knowledge of KDVS you are, it's just, that seems to be something that stands out to everyone. I mean, they are, all of these individuals are so friendly and kind and have, a willingness and are eager to learn and communicate. So I would think that makes your work more joyful, so. So speaking of your work, I want to give you all a chance to steal the screen, and I know you have a few slides to share, which I think will be really helpful for everyone listening. And then once you're finished sharing anything you want to, then we'll go from there. And I just want to remind everyone who maybe is tuning in that didn't catch it on the beginning end of this, please go ahead and chat in your questions or send them in through the Q&A button. We would love to take as many questions as possible after they're done presenting their information. So please don't hesitate to kind of ask what's on your mind as it relates to speech and communication. So take it away.
Thanks so much, Casey. And I had noted that we had a few new families. So I was going to do a really quick run through of what we know so far, but I'm not sure whether that is the best use of the time. What do you think? Do you think a brief overview is still really helpful maybe for new families? And
I think so. I do. Just a level set, I think, is always helpful.
Oh, great. And Mia is our other wonderful, is a doctoral student who's also been working with families. So Mia's still very much part of our team and writing up some further work today. So we've got Mia acknowledged here as well. And her work, I think she told me she has 71 families, which is just amazing, who've taken part. There are a few families who took part a little while ago where we might have lost touch a little bit with them. So she wanted me to give a shout out out if you wanted to check in with her and see whether there was anything remaining. Otherwise, we're going to have a really great, very detailed further paper that Mia's writing up as we speak. So that should come out this year. As Casey said, Olivia and I are based down here in Melbourne in Australia, so a bit of away from you, and the world has felt a bit bigger in the last couple of years, but we're hoping to come to the meeting next year and get to see everybody again in person, which we're really excited about. When you receive a new diagnosis, if we have families on the call with a relatively new diagnosis, I'm sure these are some of the questions you'd like to know. You know, speech pathologists also work in feeding, so I might touch on feeding briefly as we go through. You want to know what the future might look like, which Olivia will talk more about in a moment. And then what are the best therapies, which is still an area of frustration to many families. I think one of the core features in Koolen-de Vries Syndrome, but also that we do see shared in other conditions, is that early hypertonia, or the floppy sort of presentation that you might have experienced with your young babies, that you'll really remember. That tonal muscular lack of tone does sort of pervade across different skills. So the movement skills, that can affect then, you know, getting going walking, but then we get there, getting going riding a bike, but we do get there. So these skills might just take a little bit longer. And the reason for that is typically that underlying early weakness. But as I said earlier, it's fantastic to see all of these skills do keep developing. So it just takes that extra work. For some of our children, but not all of the children, there might be also some structural difficulties or structural differences that we might see. And so, for example, very few children, but some might also experience cleft lip and palate, which bring other difficulties. But you'll know definitely if you have any of these conditions very early. Some children are reporting sort of a larger tongue, but sometimes it's hard to know, is the tongue really large, or is it a difficulty with control of the tongue that makes the tongue seem maybe that it is a bit larger. So that's still some work that Mia's further work might help us to unravel a little bit more. And then sometimes whether we have an underbite or an overbite might also be features that we see in KDVS. In many different genetic conditions, we see a high arch palate. So the palate might look a little bit higher if we look into our child's mouth, but we don't really understand whether that really has much of a functional impact. It probably doesn't have a huge impact on speech differences. And then, of course, at different stages, we might have missing teeth, and in general, we might have some missing teeth. And that can just affect the precision of speech. For example, we might sound more like we might be lisping because air can escape through the teeth. So, of course, it's really important to engage with dentists and orthodontists to just look at the speech structure if you feel that your child, or if a paediatrician has mentioned that your child might have some of these challenges, because they will have impacts on speech. For some of the children, but not many, hearing might be a factor as well that could impact on speech and language difficulties. And so these are the results of our first paper of just 29 children. And we have copies of that paper for anyone who might not have that available to them. I can share that with Casey and Ashley, who would be able to send that out to you if you don't have a copy of the paper. And as I said, Mia will have more information soon for you. And then, as we know, vision is often can be affected in the children, but we know quite a bit around that, and we have fantastic optometry support. So most families are able to get many of the vision challenges corrected quite easily and efficiently, which is terrific. In terms of that early feeding, for some of you might really have lived this and experienced those really early feeding difficulties that come due to the hypertonia, and also this tracheo or laryngomalacia. I mean, some of these terms are terrible, aren't they? What does that really mean? So thinking about floppy airways, really, whether it's floppy larynx or floppy tracheal tubes, that can again affect all of that coordination of sucking, swallowing, breathing during feeding. For some of the children, then they have reflux as well, which doesn't make early oral feeding a really pleasant experience. And then that can then have impacts when you're trying to transition children onto lumpy food and solids. And we know for some of our children that choking is something that we look at and monitor carefully. But the transition through lumps and solids, of course, can be really worked upon. And we do, again, children do get there and can be really successful eaters and feeders, which is terrific to see. You can see here that this is information that Jan Ida always really collect as well, and David Koolen has some nice newer data on over 200 children now, but it does sort of map nicely to this early work that we've done, where some children do meet their first word milestones sort of on the usual trajectory, but for many children, that's the trajectory slightly delayed, so 2.5 to 3.5 years of age, but we can still keep developing words later at 5 to 7 years and really continue to improve in our speech, which is really fantastic. And something I wanted to mention, parents really want to know, should we use different devices, these alternative and augmentative communication devices is one word, or multimodal communication? Do you use sign, gesture? And people are concerned often that use of these devices will impair your verbal learning or will stop you getting to talk. But actually, evidence shows that use of these devices can increase your child's word knowledge, reduce their frustration. Sometimes they might be able to start producing early phrases or combining words together more quickly than their speech movement system might allow them at that age. And so, yeah, we see growth in language, our understanding of words or sentences or use of words and sentences often through those devices, whilst your speech is continuing to develop. So the current evidence is go for it with the device. Of course, continue to focus on oral speech, but used together is most effective. So that's often something everyone really is concerned about. These early feeding challenges and early speech difficulties often then grow into, or we start to see apraxia, which is a speech condition where children find it hard to sequence sounds together. And sometimes the prosody or the intonation patterns of your voice also can be a little different until you start to get going and be able to sequence sounds and words. So we know that it's really intensive therapy. I know Casey wouldn't mind my sharing. She was really in there with her son working on this, and he's now got great communication, but she will share with you, yeah, it is really hard, particularly in those preschool years into school years. And then sometimes we have something remaining which is just an imprecision of speech. It's called dysarthria. So once your speech sounds get going, speech can still sound a little imprecise. And again, because of our muscle tone and control of tone not being really sharp, but we can keep working on that as well. Dysarthria can be improved as well. But these are some other things we want to think about. I'm racing through a bit because we want to get to other things and want to hear your questions too. I'll just check if we had any questions in the chat, Casey, that I should stop and answer yet.
Let me look.
No, not yet.
I don't see any yet. Okay, I was going to say, yeah, it doesn't look like it yet. So y'all be thinking about it.
Warmly welcoming people to start to do that. Please don't feel you have to wait till the end. Really happy to pause and answer things that might be sparked by something on the slides as well. Coming into the middle school years, that's where we often see that greater clarity of speech after many years of hard work too. We really appreciate that. And so sometimes there's less focus on the speech, but we do see you can continue to sharpen up speech and continue to improve speech. So that's something I'm always happy to help write letters to your insurers or to school boards, etc., to try and support you in your being able to obtain therapy and to have people work on what you feel you would like worked on. Wherever we can, we try and help in that regard. But then also thinking about early literacy is really important. And I was saying before, it does seem some children are able to harness literacy once they get to read and can understand that. And that feeds back and improves your speech and then improves your language as well. So in the early years, when there's that speech production focus, it can also be good to think about rhyming words. What's the first sound in pig? What's the first sound in dig? All of this early sound awareness work. It's great for speech therapists to work work on that too. And we've put that in our paper, the first paper that we had come out, so that therapists are thinking around that, because we all want to hear the talking, but it can be good to scaffold and put those other basic foundations in for the kids too. As Olivia beautifully said before, kids love to communicate, as Casey said as well. They're such kind children, really interested in others. And these are terrific strengths that we can harness again in Koolen-de Vries. The children want to communicate, fantastic. And that's just so great. But of course, we've talked a little bit already about the challenges that we are overcoming. This is a beautiful picture of one of the children with Koolen-de Vries at his school spelling bee, as I said before, where he was a star of that spelling bee, and signing the spelling words, even though the verbal communication wasn't quite there. But we know that for some children as well, language, so our understanding of words and use of words, can be tricky, but for others, they're within the typical range or the mild range. And I believe we can keep harnessing and improving this skill as well, and getting more kids up into more of a mild range, or improving their speech and language where we are able to give them that input. So lots of things here to think about, thinking about all of the other associated medical features we want to work on, and we've got great doctors to help us with that. Thinking about the augmentative communication, other devices. I know that's hard. It's hard to find experts in those things too, but, contact us. And we also know people who are experts who are often happy to help your local therapist if they're not so confident in those areas. That speech therapy in early life really helps to get those first words going, but we know it's a bit of a longer journey. But don't stop just when the speech is intelligible. Get our local therapist to keep working and harnessing, because I think there is a lot of room there for that positive prognosis. And then around therapy, there aren't any known amazing therapies, of course, yet that have been proven in KDVS, but we do know a lot of the basic principles of speech therapy are really effective. And there are some apraxia treatments in particular that are really great. And it's just about thinking about use it or lose it as well, a lot speech, thinking about working your muscles. And for those of you who are really interested, I could talk at another time about, and to support your local therapist, about the type of principles to take into their therapy, how much practice, etc. You've got to think, how old is your child? How motivated are they to sit there and do this practice? All of that needs to be considered. So I'll stop there. It was a bit of a whirlwind tour, but I'm happy to answer any questions at this point. And then Liv was going to talk about the work that we're particularly focused on at the moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Everyone's
so
shy.
I know, that is so helpful. And I feel like, you answered so many questions in that presentation that came up last time. I feel like there were a lot of questions people were asking last time about that. So I do appreciate that, because you covered a lot of really great topics. Does anyone have any questions they want to put into the chat or the Q&A at this point before we move forward with the research component?
Or if you'd like to raise your hand, we can also do that. The group is small enough. I feel like we'd be okay.
Terrific. And Jackie has a great question, and it's really a really important question that I have not really addressed today. So we have a question around the stuttering or stammering, and sometimes disfluency is the other word that can be used in the field. We have noticed that a proportion of children start to experience stuttering or stammering. It seems that the children are experiencing this a little bit later, but it might also be that because speech is trickier to get going, that's why we're seeing the onset of stuttering a little bit later for the children. It's not until you can get your verbal communication going that we can hear those disfluencies. For others, it feels like the disfluencies come and go. And so you're right, Mia, Jackie, thanks for telling us about this. Mia has been working and doing a sub-study to go deeper into understanding when does stuttering onset for families. Do they feel it's linked to any medication or any of our other health conditions? So we will absolutely be including that in Mia's next paper. We feel that this is the most important piece of work, but she's just been still chasing up the final responses there. so I don't have that data already interpreted for you. But as soon as Mia has the paper all formed and interpreted, we'd love to give another seminar, and that will be a core part, and we'll really advertise. We will be talking about stuttering there. Thanks, Jackie. It's really something we really want to get to the bottom of as well, because I know it causes great distress to the kids and sometimes families when it's occurring. And so thank you.
Well, and we'll love to have you back. So we will take you up on that.
Great. And I'd say it would only be in like probably mid-year at the latest, if that seems okay.
That is wonderful. Wonderful.
Great.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions right now, but everyone, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat and the Q&A as we're talking, and happy to answer them in real time. So,
and happy to answer offline as well if people feel that their question is quite personal. Casey and Ashley, happy to do that offline if people feel comfortable there too. But thanks. Thank
you for that. That's terrific. Olivia, do you want to take it from here, or how do you want to proceed with the research?
Yeah, sure. So I've got some slides as well, so I'll just share my screen and get those going. So I'll just give a brief overview of our latest work, the speech tracker study, and I've seen some familiar names in the call today, so that's really nice to see, and there might be some newer families that haven't quite seen the study yet, so I'll just try and quickly go through this. So the speech tracker study we launched in November at the end of last year, so we've had a really great response so far. The speech tracker study is an example of what we call a natural history study. So that's a study that follows a group of people who all have the same condition over time to understand more about how that condition develops. So we see these types of studies in lots of areas of research and medical specialties looking at different aspects of different conditions. And for our team, our focus is on speech development over time. So until now, a lot of the research that we've done has collected information about children just from one particular time point, and we know that speech can be quite variable, and you might have experienced this too, even across different days. Speech performance can change due to a range of different reasons, so collecting data over multiple time points gives us an understanding of what's changing, but also what's staying stable over time as well. So for our particular study now, we're going to collect information over a 3-year time period to better understand, what those communication trajectories are like, what things are improving, what things might be staying the same, and what are the factors that might be contributing to those things. So why are we doing a study like this? There are sort of two main reasons why we're moving more towards these longitudinal type studies. That's one, to learn about prognosis, so understanding how speech develops over time, and this helps us to give more answers, particularly to families at the time of receiving genetic diagnosis. There's lots of questions about what the communication trajectory is going to look like, and also, as Ange touched on before, they're critical periods of speech development that we can really harness going into the therapy. And then into the treatment and therapy side of things, sort of the more that we know about the natural course of speech development as a baseline, we can then use as a comparison for different treatments that are being developed. So one example might be in drug trials, where these need to be first developed in a clinical trial to see whether they're safe and effective. And having data like the speech tracker study, data from that study, will provide speech outcome measures so that we can use these in the trials to test how effective those therapies might be at improving speech outcomes. So who are we looking for? We're looking for individuals who have a confirmed Koolen-de Vries Syndrome diagnosis by a genetic test, so either the microdeletion or single gene variant. 6 months and over. We have participants who are verbal or non-verbal, so we have different types of surveys and tasks tailored to different ages and abilities, and we have our survey information and study tasks available in a range of languages, so English, German, Dutch, French, Italian, Portuguese and Spanish. So what's involved in the study? We are asking 2 participants to take part in the study over a 3-year period. And we are going to follow up with them 2 to 3 times a year. So I've said 2 to 3 is sort of something that we're actually refining at the moment to determine the number of time points that we think would work best for the study. So we might be interested in hearing parents' feedback about this a bit later in the session. We know that ideally 3 time points over a 3-year period would be the ideal goal, just to allow us to get the most number of data points to better sensitively pick up any changes over time. But we also appreciate the time burden that this might place on families. And we know that we've sort of started the study around a busy time of the year during the end of the year, holiday season. So there might be a range of factors that might be barriers to participating. So we are really keen to hear about what might help facilitate families taking part and what's most achievable for people to take part in. So the study itself is a combination of online surveys for caregivers to complete, and if people have taken part in our previous research, we can use some of their survey answers again to avoid doubling up asking those surveys again. And then the second component is an online speech tracker system that we used for participants to log in and complete online recordings, and you do this from home using your personal laptop or device. So just quickly on the surveys that we use, these are all personalised links. So you get your own survey and you complete them online in your own time. And they might include things like uploading your genetic result. If you've already given us that before, we can use that again. A general health and medical survey, and this just helps us to interpret the speech results that we find. The daily activities and adaptive behaviour survey, it's called the Vineland, and families might have done this before in other studies or with other health professionals. And some speech and language surveys, so things like rating your child's intelligibility or some checklists of communication behaviours to go alongside the speech tasks that we do. And then for Speech Tracker itself, so families will access their tasks through another link, which we send, and you get a subject code, and that lets you into your portal. And then you're taken through a series of tasks online. There's some instructions on the screen and some recording buttons to help you input all of your lovely speech work. So I'll just go through a few examples of some of the types of tasks that you might do. So for this one, you might have done something like this before, where you just say for as long as you can in one breath, and that's having a look at your breath support or maximum phonation time that we call it. Another example here is just a short 1 or 2 minute speech sample, and that gives us a little snapshot of lots of different speech features that we can listen out to in the conversational type speech. And I like this task because participants get to choose really whatever they want to talk about. So it's kind of a nice task to break up some of the more structured things that they get to do, and they get to talk about something that's important to them, and we just get to hear a bit more about their natural speech in that setting. And another example is a picture naming task, and a lot of participants might have had experience doing these with speech pathologists for assessments, looking through picture books and just naming the pictures that they see. And we're listening out for the sounds and how they're produced in words, and whether they might be distorted or missing or changed or swapped and things like that. So yeah, they're just some examples of some of the types of tasks in the online speech tracker system. And when you work through these tasks, each of the recordings get saved. So if for some reason you got interrupted during the session and you needed to pause or stop, you can re-enter your link and it'll just pick up where you left off. So yeah, that's a really nice feature built in, because we know things can happen. And then just quickly on how it's going. So we started advertising the study in November last year. So you might have already seen our flyer circulating. And yeah, big thank you to Ashley and Casey and everyone for helping to get the study out there. We've had 29 families reach out and express interest in the study so far, which has been fantastic. It's been great chatting with everybody. And 10 of those families have completed their initial assessments and surveys, and the remainder of the families have either just recently reached out and got in touch with us, or have started a partway through some of their surveys and tasks and things. And yeah, we appreciate that it's been a really busy and disruptive period. So we encourage any families to get in touch with us if they're having any difficulties with working through the tasks, or if there are things that we can do to help facilitate you working through the tasks. We're always here and happy to help. And then just lastly, for anyone who might be interested in signing up in the study, or if you just even have any questions about it, very welcome to email us at our study email address here, speechtracker@mcri.edu.au, and that QR code can be used as well, which takes you to a registration page to sign up for the study. And that's it. So yeah, another whirlwind, but hopefully that was okay, and happy to answer any questions as well.
That was terrific. Would you mind, Olivia, to go back one more slide? Because I just did that with my phone, and y'all, it's so easy. Like it took me right there. So get your cameras out, you know, and you probably all have your phones handy, you know, and just, if you want to participate, go ahead and scan the code now. And while it's fresh on your mind, you can go ahead and get registered. It's really easy. So thank you for including that. I think we as families like easy any way we can get it.
Yes.
And Casey, I will say I've done it with Davis. It is super easy. He loved doing it. He loved looking at the computer, making all the sounds. It was very easy to do. And I'm excited to see kind of the research that comes out of it.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Ashley. Thanks,
and,
David.
I mean, how fun is that monologue section to be able to hear, you know, I think Hudson could talk about his favorite video game for probably 20 minutes. So I love that. It's really, really neat. Well, that's super exciting. You know, what are the things that you feel like, and I saw where Ashley has a question in the chat we can definitely look at, but I'm curious, you know, is there any questions you would typically expect families to ask about this type of research, or anything, you know, that you feel like maybe would be worth mentioning that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I think that some of the main questions are often those questions around the multimodal devices, and then what are the best sorts of therapies. I think they have been ongoing families' greatest concerns, and then some of these questions in the chat are very poignant as well. So Ashley shared a Facebook query. My daughter has good speech but can sound motorized in the sound at times. So yeah, that's a really lovely point around the prosody I was talking about before, intonation, or the sing-song pattern of our voice. And sometimes the jury's still out a little bit. Is it the type of therapy we're doing, where we're very much talking about the building blocks of sounds and getting children to sort of produce the sounds in a spaced way and then bringing it back together? Is that part of the challenge of the motorized speech that we end up in, or is it part of apraxia in and of itself? So the jury's out on that a little bit. But some of the latest therapies are trying, at the time when you're working on getting the speech sounds connected and together, they are trying to think much more about the prosody patterns. And so that you're treating the prosody at exactly the same time you're putting those sounds together. So two of the nice therapies that really do that are the Nuffield therapy and something called REST therapy, the Rapid Syllable Treatment Program. And those therapies do really try to resolve that robotic sounding or motorized sounding speech presentation. So the REST therapy, I think, is a nice one through the University of Sydney. And Liv, while I'm just chatting for a minute, do you mind finding a link to the REST therapy?
That'd be
because
great.
it will talk about those basic principles. And I think REST isn't great for younger kids. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think REST for some of our children mightn't be the best first option, because it works with non-words. So it works with made up words rather than real words. And when you're really wanting language to get going, Koolen-de Vries, maybe it feels less intuitive to go to those made up nonsense words. But when our kids are a bit older and that motorized patterns are remaining, this treatment is really good and focuses a lot on getting prosody going. So hopefully that helps, but I really appreciate that question from that family. It's a really core challenge in apraxia across all conditions and not just in Koolen-de Vries. At what age should a child start therapy? Yeah, another really great question. I mean, you can start speech therapy at 6 months or 1 year of age. Increasingly, there are some nice treatment programs now looking at trying to increase babble even and just increase any oral experiences. There's a galactosemia study called with Babble Bootcamp where they're really trying to look at that. So I'm involved in that study peripherally, but watching to see what those results will bring. Very excited to see this very early intervention approach. So yeah, you can start speech therapy as early as possible. The challenge comes though in getting to, until a child has a little bit of vocalization or a shaping sound, you can't just sit and make them do drill work, which is a lot of what apraxia needs to be. So it's a really great question because we sort of say, well, he's too young to expect someone, the kids don't have attention. They can't sit down at 2. They don't want to do that. And do they have the ability to do that? So it's a really good question and quite a personalized question. I know we all hate that answer. But yeah, working with your local clinician, thinking about the abilities of your child at that time and what your goals are will really help shape that. But the earlier, the better is still the base response. Can my child's stuttering eventually go away? That is just something we're really looking at. Some people have reported that the stuttering is just resolved. In the onset of stuttering in children without Koolen-de Vries, in the general population, a large proportion of children, about 70% even of children at age 2 and 3 years of age can have some periods of disfluency, but they nearly all resolve. You're only left with about 1% of individuals who persist. So what we're seeing in Koolen-de Vries is a higher incidence of experiencing this stuttering. Stuttering's always been a bit linked in with apraxia, and people don't understand really how these things are linked or not, but it does feel in Koolen-de Vries that the stuttering is more present at certain times. So I'm sorry, I know that's all a bit fluffy for now, but this is the data that Mia will have in a really systematic way. She designed the questionnaire very carefully with the broader team. And so I feel confident that we're going to be able to answer these questions better. Yeah, good question. The difference between apraxia and dyspraxia. Apraxia, so yeah, the term, it used to be called developmental verbal dyspraxia, but in the US, you guys wanted to change that because insurance companies, when they see the word developmental, they think we don't need to worry about funding that later on. So they change it to childhood, which implied more this might be staying for at least childhood. But dis usually means a bit of a challenge, and A in true medical terms means the complete absence of something. So it's a really funny term because of course the children have speech and it's just more of a difficulty. So it's not a true medical term, but dis should mean a bit of a problem and apraxia means more of a problem. But actually when we adopted the term childhood apraxia of speech in the speech field, we didn't really think about that traditional, semantics of the medical field. So it's a good question. But yeah, in the UK, they still call it verbal dyspraxia and even developmental verbal dyspraxia in the UK. But in Australia and most European companies, we adopted the ASHA, the American Speech and Hearing Association terminology from a really great paper they had, a consensus paper. And we're looking to do a reboot of that paper. Unfortunately, ASHA don't really support development of guidelines anymore. It's not so much part of their remit, and I can see why. It's very resource heavy and the research moves very quickly. But there are a group of researchers, largely led in the US, but they're bringing around the rest of us, the rest of the globe, to relook at characterization of apraxia and other speech conditions. So we'll be able to keep bringing the updates and that back to you all. Thanks, Liv, for putting up rest therapy. Yes, epilepsy. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. This is something we're looking at too. Absolutely. In children outside of Koolen-de Vries, where there might be more information on the relationship between speech and seizures, that's absolutely something that we can see. When children are experiencing epilepsy and seizures, that you might see what we sometimes is called a regression, or just losing of skills for a time. And then when the seizures can be well controlled, we can regain and build those skills. I know there are some families for whom epilepsy has been really challenging of late, and very heartbreaking to see the loss of skills. It's very fortunate for the majority of people we can control the seizures, and that's really positive. But yes, we do see that relationship, Steve, and you're right on the money. I wasn't going to bring that up, but as you have, that's also something that we're looking at in association with the stuttering and the stammering. So as you've raised that, I will go there. A cheat sheet. Yes, all of these terms, it's been on my very guilty to-do list forever to simplify these terms. And I think that's a lovely question. Liv, let us take that up and let us try and put that into, and I'm sure we will find some other great, clever people who might have already done that, and we won't reinvent the wheel, but we would love to do that and share that with you. I mean, it takes our new grad speeches the whole first year to get the dissociation between these terms. And why does everything have dis in front of it? For feeding things, we even call that dysphagia, but I try and just use feeding for that one. So great questions. Good question. To discontinue speech therapy. I think that so much of speech is about where the child is at, how happy the child is where they're at, and the family core, and how successful the child feels they're being in their workplace, which is school and or other settings. If the family all feel that they are in a good place with therapy, with how the child's communicating, that's one reason. Other reasons are health reasons. If we have so much else going on, if we have to have some surgery for a time, or we're going to have to recover from that and do other things, all families go through things that outside of the condition of Koolen-de Vries, we're caring for somebody and elderly relatives and things. So we don't carry that guilt. If we need to stop therapy for a time because we have to live our lives in a broader sense, that's another very good reason for a time if we really need to stop therapy. So it's just a bit of one of those broader life questions that, any extra therapy helps guide us. But there will be times in our lives where we're already doing OT, we're seeing a doctor for something else, it's easy to sit here and say as many sessions as possible, but of course that's all within just what we can fit in our lives. Yes, Jackie, lovely question. In addition to taking part in the surveys, is it helpful to send speech assessments from school? Absolutely. In the work that Mia was doing, everyone would know we asked so much for those surveys and questions. Liv's been so careful because we know we're already coming back to you multiple times here. We haven't sort of wanted to ask too much more of you, but some of the newer families in particular who haven't already shared that data with us, yes, we would warmly welcome that. So that's a really nice point you raise, and maybe we could build that in, Liv, that if people are happy and willing to share, because maybe some of the newer families don't mind going back through, but for some of the families that have now been through a couple of studies with us, we were really mindful to not to further burden you. We know the Vineland, everyone hates that Vineland, so we really do try and apologise for that and think about ways we can share that. Jen Ida recently, for another group that I'm working with, have shared some of the Vineland information. We've got all the governance in place for that. It's all HIPAA compliant, Health Information Privacy Act compliant. So, everyone's aware of the burden that your families are under, and for doing the health and medical survey, which is also our other very big ask of you that we try not to repeat. Liv did wonder, Liv has a little, did we have a survey for today, Liv, or we might do that another time to ask families how they feel about multiple time points of assessment?
Did you really short
poll? Pop that in the chat.
Two questions.
Pop that in the chat today if people are happy to fill that in.
If people are happy to do that, it would be really nice to just get a little check-in of what families think. So I'll just paste it in the chat now.
Thanks, Liv. Because as Liv said beautifully before, speech changes, as you're all more than aware, over time. So there are some speech stability studies where they'll collect 5 samples on a day. We sort of didn't want to do that to everybody. And for development in our kids, things happen more over time. So that's why we went for 3 time points. When you start coming down to 2 time points, you can imagine if you just had one really bad day on one occasion where we sat down to do the task and then one good day, it's sort of harder to average out the samples. Whereas if you can get 3 in a year, that's sort of why we're asking for those 3. But as you say, research fatigue, we've asked a lot of you already over time. So yeah, Liv has done that nice survey just to see how you feel, because honestly, consumer, your involvement and input is critical. So if you really tell us 3 is just absolutely too many, then that's okay. We can methodologically say that in our papers. Families, we asked families and they said 2 is plenty. Liv, do you have further things to add? I've just had a talk fest. You might have thought of other things whilst I was talking that would be really useful for the families.
No, I just appreciated the question about the previous reports, because we know that adds just such a richness of information as well. And I think, yeah, we were hesitant to ask that of families at the outset when we were asking so many other things at the time. But yeah, we can easily build in a upload function to be able to collect those previous reports from families as well. And then it's just another thing in the checklist of tasks to do for the study. So yeah, that would be really good.
And any other feedback, welcome to. Sorry.
I will say, I was just going to say, I'm not sure if everyone can see the link. It looks like it might have just gone to host and panelists. So I don't know, Olivia, if you can maybe post it one more time.
Everyone. Yeah, I'll do that again.
Everyone. And then I'll give you a plug. I actually already did it. Like I literally did it while we were talking, and it took 10 seconds. So it's the fastest survey of all time if people want to fill it out. So hopefully I'm your first response.
Thanks, Casey. That's awesome.
I know we're getting close to time. Is there anything you feel like, again, that we haven't discussed that we need to make sure we bring attention to today?
I think we are trying to welcome more feedback. I think that the relationship between researchers and advocacy groups, family advocacy groups has been, and foundations, a bit more like, oh, we're the researchers, we're coming in, we're telling you what we sort of want to do here, but we genuinely try and want to improve in our consumer feedback and in working together a little bit more. I think that's something we've talked about with Ashley and the board as well, that it would be good to start thinking about research priorities. And certainly in speech, I'm quite confident the response would be please more treatment. So I really acknowledge that. But that would be something, if people can start thinking about areas they feel within the speech and language domain are really important to them. And it doesn't have to be our group that does that. We might know an expert in another field that's really terrific on that, who we would really bring into the KDVS community and family to work on those areas too. So please, yeah, I guess that would be my last shout out.
Oh, that's great. Olivia, anything else you wanted to mention before I close us out?
No, just to say thank you to the families who have already participated in the study, and it's been so wonderful to work with them. And yeah, just to highlight again, if there are families that are still yet to complete their surveys or tasks, happy to help with anything that might be getting in the way of that. We have offered some Zoom sessions for families if they need some help to work through the tasks for the first time as well. So that's an option. So yeah, just get in touch with us over email.
That's wonderful. Well, and we will make sure for all of those of you that are watching that we continue to keep these links in front of you so you know how to access the information as well as the surveys and to participate. And again, just really want to thank you both, not only just for being here today and taking time out of your own busy schedules, but just for your commitment, to helping our families learn more, and just your thoughtfulness that you just mentioned around you just being so mindful even of what you're asking us to complete. And we just really appreciate just how thoughtful you are and just how much commitment you've put into it. So again, just really, really appreciate your time and attention to it. And thanks to everyone who's watched today. We're grateful for your participation, and just keep all these great questions coming. You know, I think the more that we can talk to the researchers and share our information, the more it helps them and ultimately helps those we love. So again, just really appreciate everyone tuning in, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day. And we'll look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. So thank you, and talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody.
So much.
Thank you. Bye.